Massive thank you as always to our top tier patrons Sarah Turner and Alexander Lashley. It's Not Just In Your Head is hosted by psychotherapist Dr. Harriet, addiction and substance misuse disorder counsellor Ikoi Hiro, and myself, editor and producer Liam Tate. This podcast is entirely funded by listeners, and as the famous meme states, we are critiquing capitalism because we are forced to participate in it in order to survive. So if you can afford to support the podcast, then your contribution will ensure that we can keep making this show. However, if you can't, then please just tell your friends about us, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, and YouTube.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
We can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
I don't know, Dan, if you had like a blurb, if you wanted to sort of introduce yourself or anything like that.
I'm a consultant in general medicine in the NHS in Scotland. I'm also a health systems researcher for the University of Gibraltar. I've published quite a lot on hospital systems, triage systems, more recently quite a bit about COVID. And yeah, I think I'm just trying to give a bit of a voice to the frontline staff that are seeing the NHS kind of disintegrate in front of their eyes, really.
Yeah, you actually retweeted something that was somebody who'd, I guess, had supplied like an anonymous forum for nurses, etc., to say what was going on and what they felt was happening. And someone wrote, "We all dread coming into work and cry after every shift. We didn't sign up to do war medicine."
Yeah.
For, listeners outside the UK, is there a sort of general overview of sort of what's happening to the NHS or what has happened or how we've got to this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly tell you what it's like at the front door at the moment. That's in the A&E and emergency departments in the hospitals. There is a huge unmet need. We have so many unwell, sick patients and not enough staff and not enough space to treat them. We have patients lining the corridors. We are converting, outpatient clinics and cupboards into more clinical space. We have lines and lines of ambulances waiting to offload their patients. And we're having some very sad record-breaking waits. Some people are waiting 16 hours, 24 hours just to get into A&E, and then waiting a day just to get admitted into hospital. And it's never, in 22 years and looking at all the data, it has never been anywhere near this level of demand and unmet need. And you may have seen the statistics that approximately 500 patients a week are dying because they can't access care. And we're all spent, the frontline staff are the morale, the energy, everyone's got that 1,000-yard stare, don't know what to do after a shift ends. It's real gruesome stuff that I never thought I would see in the UK.
There was breaking news like a couple of hours ago, the negotiations or even just the first attempt at negotiations, right, between the union Unite and one of the health ministers, is that right? Or the health minister. They said the NHS needs to focus on productivity.
Yeah, it's kicking someone when they're down, isn't it? Productivity. I don't know if we've ever been so productive. There is a point that comes when the system's so saturated that productivity falls because, there is nowhere to treat people, there's nowhere to see people. And we've got so many people and not enough staff. And I think what you refer to is the negotiations between the nurses and the government about pay and working conditions. And again, we've 7,000 employees leave the NHS every week. Nurses, you can't speak to a nurse without them talking about how they're going to leave and what they're looking at. They're looking at New Zealand, they're looking at working in, as a barista. Everyone's trying to escape from it because it's been ongoing for months and years. We've been suffering this. We all take it in winter. We take a few months where we take a beating. It settles down. But we had no break at all this year. We were at the highest ever capacity in winter, in summer. And then just to continue into winter, everyone's just proper exhausted. The very least you can do is try and incentivize them to stay by paying them properly, really.
Well, in the US, there's a slightly different situation because I think the conservatives have starved the NHS in order to get people to want to go to profit healthcare like we have,
100%, 100%.
which is also terrible. And so that they're starving people in order to show that public health care is a failure. But let me tell you, from the other side of the Atlantic, for-profit health care is a huge failure. There are 7,100 nurses on strike just in New York today, and there were going to be more than 15,000, except that they set a couple of hospitals settled. And that's because the ratio of patient to nurse is up to 15 people. And the doctors are supporting the nurses because they need the nurses to do the kind of care they do. And nurses have been outspoken that administrators get paid more and more with better and better conditions every year, and they get shafted. Absolutely. So they've gotten, those that settled got a 19% raise, and they also got a third of the patients assigned to them. We'll see if the hospitals honor this.
Wow. But that's quite a success. I didn't hear about that. I think I'll probably tweet about that later, because it's good to know that taking industrial action can make a difference.
But it does.
It's as you say. It's when you've got someone in power or a group in power that are only interested in profit making, and our government have a very well established record over the last decade, but certainly over the COVID pandemic, of trying to extract as much money as they can from money that should be going to helping people. It's a $2 billion fix for us to get the nurses back to where they were pay-wise in 2010. It's a $2 billion fix. It's nothing compared to what they have pilfered away. And it would save thousands and thousands of lives. So this is ideological. The stance is not economic. It's not pragmatic. It is literally just ideological and greed.
It is here too. I mean, nurses are some of the most militant unionists in the United States for a good reason. And the other unions in the city, the other city workers that are organized, support the nurses. And some are joining the picket lines because without nurses, healthcare doesn't exist. And so, Absolutely. And it is a capitalism gone mad kind of calculus here. Yeah, and no doubt in England too.
And that's the point. It's not even like I could get a kind of capitalist view that is, we want to boost the economy and we want, everyone to be rich, or we want the opportunity for people to be rich. But that's not what this is. This is momentary greed, because yes. we know that if you invest in healthcare, particularly at the level that we're at here, probably the same in the States, if you invest properly in healthcare, then actually you put loads of money into the economy, you get people back to work, people are healthy, it generates, the Financial Times did a piece, they calculated for every pound you put in, you'll get £4 out. So it's not about economy. It's literally, we feel here that we've kind of been, the government's been hijacked by some folk that are only interested in making money for themselves, even not even their group, just themselves. And I'm afraid we're all paying a really horrible and gruesome price for it.
Yeah, we are too. Your pathological narcissist at least quit. Ours had to be ejected, but that's,
You might still put yours in jail, though, so we're looking to you for that leadership.
Yeah. But this is another thing that the current government have floated, is this idea of making it against the law for healthcare providers to strike. I'm not sure of the details. I don't know if you know.
I do. It's a ridiculous, draconian move. They know they're out at the next election. They're they're going all in on this, and they'll try and push it through. But the odd thing is, the punishment for striking, if you're an NHS worker or any worker, would be the employer would have the power to sack you. And I'm just not sure the NHS would be able to sack anyone when we're 47,000 nurses short. And for some of my colleagues, they would be quite grateful for it. They would be like, at least I don't feel guilty for leaving. You sacked me. Fair enough. I'll move on, know.
Well, in the US, where they have done that and forbidden strikes, one of the strike demands is no penalties for striking. It just means another demand on the part of the strikers.
I didn't know they'd banned it ignorantly of me in the States.
No, not in the nurses union, but in some other unions they have. It's something that the railroad workers are dealing with. And in the teachers union, they banned the teachers union in Connecticut. They banned them from striking so that they kept striking. And one of the primary demands was no penalties. And so that they won that, even though some of the teachers went to jail. They had huge popular support.
Oh, my Lord.
And they organized in the communities of students and parents, and they won their strike.
I can't believe they put some teachers in jail for that. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, the richest people who wanted to give less for education and have more for their own opulence, their own wealth, wanted that, but it didn't fly because the teachers were united, and the sight of these nice ladies going to jail mobilized a lot of popular support.
And they forget, or they try and make us forget, that all of their wealth and power is built on us. Is nothing without the workers that do the action, that create the wealth.
That's right.
And as long as we remember it, I think that power hopefully stays with us.
Yeah, I was wondering, you made a really good point, that the idea that you put money in and more money comes out with the NHS in terms of, so like you said, it's an ideological pursuit. And I'm interested, like, if anyone's really, do you think anyone's buying it? I mean, it feels to me ever since the Conservatives got in power back with the Lib Dem in, was it 2010?
2010, yep, that's right.
Yeah, that people were already saying, they could see this on the horizon. They were like, okay, this is how it will go. They'll underfund public health service, and then they'll point and say, look, it doesn't work, and then they'll bring in all private investment. Yeah. So it's like one of these things that people have obviously been seeing, come from over the horizon for a while. And I'm just wondering if either experience with the general public or the staff, like, is there this feeling of like buying into the narrative, like, oh, if we have private, it will be better? Or is everyone can just presume it? The vibe I get is everyone can see through this, but maybe I'm in a bubble.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, oddly enough, the pandemic has accelerated the demise of the NHS, and therefore the strengthened the position of the privatisation faction. But I think that acceleration, it was too quick for them. And we saw very clearly this chasm between what these people who represent us were saying and then actually doing. And a lot of that, I don't know if Harry or Eiko know, but our government are accused, and there's cases ongoing where they effectively siphoned off a lot of our pandemic money to their mates and to their chums and to their donors. And we didn't get anything back for it. It was, it wasn't that it was a preferred contract. It was actually a substandard contract that provided faulty PPE, a test and trace system that didn't work. Billions and billions, they calculated 65 billion was wasted on that route. And I think that did expose this government really quite strongly. And as you say, Liam, the public, there does seem to be a bit of a light bulb moment for the public that is, oh my God, these guys actually are just there for themselves and they're just going to take from us, even if that means it costs some of us our lives and our livelihoods and our, our abilities. However, this is a very timely question for me, Liam, because I'm starting to get really quite frustrated about it. I'm starting to hear that narrative that they've been pushing for, over a year, about things like, the NHS is inefficient, we put too much money in, and a lot of that money was the pandemic money that a lot of it was siphoned off. Things like GPs aren't working hard enough, they don't want to see patients, etc. And actually, from educated people, I'm hearing this same narrative coming back to me. They still support the nurses, they still want the NHS, but there's a chat about it. There's like, well, actually, do you want to pay nurses that much? Because you want people that want to do it, not people that are in it for the money. And you're starting to hear that, and even at Christmas around my dinner table, a pharmacist, a GP, a nurse, a school teacher, and I'm hearing this chat, and I'm starting to go, that power of repetition of, it's just, and I think we know, but I think they are making sadly, they're making a wee bit of room now.
It's interesting because, Rishi Sunak obviously flew to California at one point a few months ago to need to have talks with various US private healthcare firms. And then he's appointed a private healthcare advisor. So, clearly no surprise the moves are there. And like you said, there's probably some effort to propagandize this idea as the NHS is old and sort of creaky and needs modernizing.
But no, Liam, they don't come in with the straight up, actually, this private healthcare system is going to be better for us. Let's talk about it. Let's have a discussion about it. Because they know, and partly something we can be thankful to the States for showing us that when you put it in a debate, private healthcare does not make any ground at all and loses spectacularly in performance and cost and outcomes, and patient satisfaction. So they're not, even though they're being quite blatant about it, they've got these advisors in, they're making these trips. I'd love the debate to come out. Let's have the open debate. Let's have an argument about it.
They don't want to. They can just look across the pond. We have the most people in the world. Over 1,100,000 people have died of COVID in the United States. We're hardly the most populous nation, but we have the most deaths, and we have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. And it's not the best either. It's not even among the 5 best, even though it's the most expensive. And so also our president, too, took the pandemic money that we had and the pandemic supplies and sold them. And God knows where that money went. Because in a system that's all about profit, healthcare doesn't count. And there's another thing that I think is really important about nurses. And it's not to insult doctors, but when I was involved with the nurses, they said, look, it's like the way you handle a drink. Nurses, nurse your drink. Doctors, doctor your drink. That what nurses are trained to do is emotional labor as well as physical healing.
Absolutely. And you could probably get away with a lot of what's happening with an army of nurses and a handful of doctors.
Yes.
You could not get away with an army of doctors and a handful of nurses. The whole system would collapse instantly. They are the most important part of the healthcare without a shadow of a doubt. It's classic. You walk into, so I see people in the front door, and the guy will come in and he'll be really unwell and he's got sepsis. I do my little 10-minute assessment, 15-minute assessment. I'm like, okay, this guy's got sepsis. So it's taking me 50 minutes, 20 minutes to get to that realization. And I turn around and say, well, okay, they need some bloods, they need an x-ray, they need a urine dip, they need fluids, and they need these 3 antibiotics, and I walk away. At the end of that, I walk away, go to the next patient. That's 3 or 4 hours of work that has to be done. And actually, me saying that stuff is irrelevant if it's not done. The patient will not be saved if it's not done. So absolutely agree with you. I mean, we should be worshipping our nurses, and it's genuinely upsetting to know how they've been treated just now. And no wonder they're leaving.
Yeah, well, they're getting a lot of popular support in New York City, where they have won good contracts and there's 2 holding out, and those 2 unions holding out, those are very highly supported. They're highly supported by the population, because we who have had for-profit healthcare, it does make profit, but it doesn't make health.
Right. And so our government at the minute, is not really negotiating at all, even though the nurses have gone on strike and they will continue to go on strike, right? And the various different aspects of the healthcare sector are going on strike, right? We had the ambulance drivers near Christmas. And so presumably, this is a long haul thing. This is going to go on for months and months. That's how I imagine it. I mean, do you think different?
I think, in England, I did a lot of my training in England and have a lot of colleagues, and I'm in regular touch with them. And the general consensus is that we don't know if there is a way back from this. The sense is that they're on their way to privatisation, and there will be a huge chunk taken out of the NHS, and it will never really look the same again. What they would need is the next government to come in and very much commit to a restoration and really commit to that. But that's not the signals we're getting from our Labour government here. They seem a wee bit lost. They seem a little bit sucked into the government's narrative, actually, if I'm honest, that they think the NHS needs reform. And yeah, reform's great, and we can look at that, and but first, let's at least have enough nurses and enough beds to treat the emergency people dying of heart attacks and sepsis, and let's have enough beds to deal with that, and then let's talk reform if you want to. I think to go straight into talking about reform shows that this government, or at least part of the government to be, which it will probably be Labour, they don't get it yet. They've not switched on to it yet. They've not engaged in what is actually happening on the ground, which is hugely worrying.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Sorry, I think in Scotland, if I can, it is different. Our government is definitely more engaged. They are desperately trying to avert strikes. They managed to avert the first round of strikes. It's unclear whether they'll avert the second round. They offered much better pay and not enough. And they're investing in our NHS. They are genuinely trying to recover it. We're tied because there's only so much money we can generate for the NHS because we're tied to England.
Right.
But I think there's hope here. I think NHS will survive in Scotland. But as Liam says, unless why would the government change? I don't know why they would change tactics. The only reason they would change is because so many people are experiencing a horrendous, point of care access that they know it's affecting their voters too, and eventually they may change their mind and come a little bit of a way. But yeah, I could definitely see this dragging on for months.
Yeah, well, in the US, like in England, Labour, in kicking out Corbyn, went to the right and got rid of their progressive wing. And the Democrats in the United States have moved towards corporate interests and only have a smaller progressive wing. And those are the people that would be fighting for public health care, and to the detriment of the healthcare system. But I'm glad that Scotland is doing better.
Yeah, I mean, it was odd. I never thought I'd be supporting what effectively is a nationalist party, the Scottish National Party.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually incredibly socialist. We don't pay for prescriptions. We don't pay for hospital parking. Our kids don't pay for university. They're trying to expand healthcare. Our nurses get better paid. We've got more doctors. So I think it's the only reason at the moment to stay in the UK. I think if it did become a two-tier system, I know we would be gone. Myself, my family, we would move. But I know many people that would not tolerate having to say no to a patient because they've not got the right insurance cover. I know for a fact.
As they do here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting, certainly in London, when you look at, I look around at various friends, and when I've looked at job descriptions, often the perks include private health insurance and, list all the different, and dental and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, man, this is not the direction of travel. I would think about it for my kids. I would genuinely think about it. If down south healthcare's that bad, I would think about it. And it's as you said, Harriet, they're forcing us into it. They're kind of making it so that the only option is you either wait 2 months for your cancer treatment, or you get private healthcare and try and go in that way. So.
Or you die because you didn't have the money. I mean, in the United States, medical bills are one of the top 3 causes of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Because people can't afford it.
That's even people that have healthcare insurance.
Yes, because the bills are overwhelmingly high, and the insurance companies whittle down and have a copay. My daughter's insurance, my daughter is in her 30s. She has private health insurance. She has a $5,000 copay for her and her husband, who's also in his 30s, and they're healthy.
So what does that mean? Do they have to pay the first $5,000?
They have to pay the first $5,000. And then the hospital bills are in hundreds of thousands if they ever had the bad luck to be hospitalized. So people die rather than go into the hospital.
And we have to remember this system is an outlier. I mean, the world over, this is not the way that healthcare works. You can look at Japan, you can look at Norway, France, Germany, New Zealand, and sadly, a lot of the African nations are being forced into private because of the way they've not got the good baseline to start from. But it's the aberration. This way of having profit before people is definitely an outlier, but it's contagious.
It is. And they have the money to buy influence. That's the trouble.
Absolutely. And that's what they're doing here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the thing that strikes me as odd, particularly just sort of going back to that ideological kind of battleground of inefficiency or the NHS being old, it's like I would have thought if you're a conservative, you would be by definition priding yourself on conserving things. And the NHS as old equals bad is kind of strange for the right-wing position to take, because you can say things have got too bureaucratic, or XYZ thing doesn't work, but it's like the basis of the NHS, it does work. The whole idea is solid. I like if I'd been in your situation at Christmas time, I would have flipped the table.
I nearly did. I did, Liam. My brother as well. I love my brother. We get on great, but there was nearly some conflict there. I have to be honest. The power, and this is what we're in. We're in this misinformation, disinformation era, where we're battling just to get the facts out and to get the truth out, and it can be exhausting, I think, to do that. And to hear patients complain about their GPs and I'll try and get an appointment with my GP is like, and they're blaming the GPs and, it's just, I wish I could go through it with them every time. You can't obviously, but it's, are we losing the battle? I think the Conservatives will probably succeed in getting a two-tier health system in England, but as they kill that part of the NHS, I'm quite sure they're going to kill their own party. Because I think we'll have these memories, Harriet, of what you were saying about the bankruptcy, not being able to get care, and we'll all tie it to this moment because, and that was the only positive side really of this, what COVID caused. It accelerated and exposed them, and I think it's too quick now, and we'll all just look back at this time and say, well, actually, when that government were in, they pushed this through, and I'm not sure, as you said, Liam, that we'll ever trust the Conservative Party ever again.
But one hopes not, because they can buy so much influence with their billions. But even in the United States, Medicare for all would be popular if any of the politicians really pushed it through. It is the most popular option, public health care for all, and they don't do it because they depend on private money to get elected. So, it's who pays the piper calls the tune. Yeah. And that's the problem here. But there's no doubt that the mass of people want free health care.
Well, Medicare isn't free anymore.
That's true. It's changing. They're whittling away at it as they are in the public health system in England.
It can be quite expensive. My mom's under Medicare, and it's often a fight to get her to go see the doctor because of all the copays. Every time she goes to the doctor, it runs up. I generally end up, paying about 100 and some in copays for every visit.
Unbelievable. That is so sad. And I couldn't practice like that. I really couldn't practice like that. I mean, just now, I can pick up a homeless person could come off the street and I could get him a transplant if he needed it. I could get him seen by the top respiratory specialist in the country if he needed it. And that's what healthcare is. It's
yes, should be.
It's a right. It's a human right. But I do think that even though money talks, and it really does, but they have to be clever enough to convince enough people that what they're doing is in their interest. And I think they've broken that, and I think that's what Liam was getting to before, that they've broken that trust and that bond with so many voters now. Just now, the biggest majority that Labour have ever had in terms of the polls, Conservatives are all the way down to 20%. And, if they had an election now, there's estimates of about, they would have from nearly 400 seats, they go down to 60 seats. And it does feel like something's broken. And I, genuinely hope that our memories are long enough to hold it all the way through, I think.
Yeah, and I hope they have an alternative to vote for.
That's the big problem. Anyone would be better. Honestly, I do think that Labour will be a magnitude of times better than the current Conservatives, but they are getting lost along the way, and there is some chat that maybe they're being funded by private and private interests in private healthcare. There is some chat about that. I don't know, but yeah, there is a point. There's a point.
Yeah, the Times, as reported by Novara Media, there's a very good little video that they did. But the point being that the Times released this thing just with graphs, basically murdering the Conservatives, just showing wage increases, annual wages, and just how Labour gets into power, things get better. Yep. Things get better in the NHS. Everyone's getting paid a bit more money, blah, blah, blah. It all ascends. And then as soon as 2010 hits, there's a series of 4, 5, 6 charts of just everything just tanking.
Absolutely. It was spectacularly done. And it was comparing it to all the other countries, comparative nations, how poorly we invest in our health system. And the cheeky thing they did that really grates, they actually added all the COVID contracts, which eventually was 85 billion, to the NHS budget. So it looks like 2020, 2021, we had this massive increase in funding. And actually, core NHS spend actually fell 10 billion. And all that money was for these contracts that the NHS didn't even provide. These were all private contractors, very inefficient, loss of money. And now they can actually turn around and say, record NHS funding, we fund, and try and pull people across that way. When people like Financial Times, the Lancet did a commission on the NHS, when they actually extract the numbers and the data, there's actually a real terms fall in funding. And we're something like £39 billion equivalent behind the EU 14 average. So we've actually underfunded for the last 10 years, 40 billion a year. And we wouldn't have this crisis if we'd funded it properly.
Yeah, and the other thing that's wild is that there was, I can't remember the name of it, but I will put it in the show notes, which is that there was I'm not quite sure what you call it, some sort of like crisis plan for if like an influenza-like thing happened in Britain. And they did a whole sort of report about it, which detailed all the things that they speculated would happen to the UK and to the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And the government then just ignored it. And then obviously COVID hit, and, they should be held accountable, because it's not, there's this narrative like, we were just, rolling with it and trying to figure everything out. It's like, no, there was stuff presented to you that you commissioned and was paid for. Again, public money, etc. And you saw, you saw this coming. It was on the sort of things to be prepared for, and you just did fuck all. And so there's a real rage. I'm just wondering ways people can fight back or push back. And obviously, people have they are part of unions and they are striking. The general population, what is it? Turn up. Give people cakes, cheer them on, or I'm wondering what kind of things. I've seen like NHS Millions and Every Doctor and stuff like that online. Yeah. Are there things that you would sort of recommend?
I think what's really important is to amplify the truth, and whether that's in a conversation to your taxi driver or on social media or whenever you get a chance to mention it. I think people underestimate the power of just keep reinforcing the facts and the truth and holding, our government's feet to the fire and just calling them out all the time. Because I asked this question of a Good Law Project, actually. It was like, surely we should be able to take them to court. I mean, the COVID situation was unbelievable. I mean, it was truly, and I think the States went the same way, as did Brazil, actually. But it was truly in your face profiteering at the expense of the population, and thousands of deaths. And many of them were avoidable. I mean, 100K maybe avoidable. And we were screaming about it at the time. And my question was, well, if they are prioritizing finances when their role as a minister is to promote health, then are those activities that promote finances covered within their ministerial protections? Because the Good Law Project came back and said, well, basically, because they're in their ministerial role, any harm that comes, they can't really be accountable for it. But my question is, well, if they were actually pursuing their ministerial goals, but if they were pursuing something else, surely they're then culpable for it. UK is bad for this anyway. We're not very good at holding power to account here.
Or the United States.
We would like to see some prosecutions, I think, and we would like to see, some really hard lessons learned, because that's atrocious. And the worst thing about it all is we're no better prepared for the next pandemic. If anything, we're worse prepared. Yeah. It will be worse next time, because there'll be even bigger fights about what restrictions we should do and what masks we should do. I can see it being even worse next time. So we need to learn. And sometimes I think that means legal teams to get involved.
Yeah, well, I think it's really clear. I saw a statistic that said $50 billion would pay for every single person in the entire world to be getting the 3 COVID vaccines they need. The United States has spent more than 100 billion just keeping the Ukraine fight going.
Yeah.
So you wonder what, the question is about the priorities all around,
Absolutely.
whether keeping people alive is as important as killing people to gain geopolitical advantage.
It raises what the pandemic, the lesson it should teach us is that global health, that is the health systems in each and every country, are pertinent and important to each and every one of us. Because at any point, had there been robust enough health systems in other countries, even modestly robust, we could have probably expunged the SARS-CoV-2, or at the very least, we could have kept it very, very low prevalence rates until we had vaccines.
Right.
And the next one that comes out, might not have, relatively low mortality rate like SARS-CoV-2. And I think we should all be like, what you would like is that people to say, well, healthcare unites us. We care for each other. We provide health for each other. So let's, take out the barriers to other countries having good healthcare systems.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, greed's just getting in the way.
Yes, it does. Because Pfizer and Moderna, the two big vaccine makers, don't want vaccines, give up their formula to the world. And so people will continue to die. It's really a deadly system. You
have to give it to AstraZeneca because they waived their patent and they provided the vaccine at cost price.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I don't know exactly what happened, but
Pfizer and Moderna didn't follow their example.
Yeah, and the stories started to come out that AstraZeneca was dangerous, and when actually it was, no more dangerous than any of the other vaccines, and not that dangerous at all compared to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But that in 2020, you would have thought a global pandemic, we've got a vaccine. You would have thought they would just produced it for everybody without thinking about money.
It's definitely bleak. I also wonder, though, given, and maybe my mind is being poisoned by the past couple of years, but I also wonder if truth works, because what seems to happen is just that bullshit seems to spread quicker and people sort of are more likely to buy into it, or propaganda works, I guess, to some degree. And
sensationalizing something, yeah.
Yeah, and so I wonder...
the drama.
Yeah, so I wonder is, part of the solution in sort of pushing back on this sort of stuff, whether it's the privatization of the NHS or, the general...
I think so. I think we are stuck on, a lot of the very good voices of the pandemic, very sensible, educated, not necessarily educated, but sensible voices. They were so meticulous in how they communicated. They would. Science is like that. You have doubt. There's always an element of doubt that you need to keep there to keep things progressing. And what they didn't understand, I don't think, is that a lot of the public just see that as doubt. And there's a point that comes where you need to go forward with the same conviction that those that are pushing against it, which they don't really care about what the facts are. But you need to come forward with a bit of conviction. So that is, vaccines are definitely not causing the harm that SARS-CoV-2 is causing. You are better getting a vaccine than you are getting COVID. And yet scientists would say evidence suggests that the vaccines, and folk understand that they bring that in because they're talking as if they're writing a paper or a publication. And I think sometimes you just need that commitment in and committing to, and it is sensational what's happening with the climate, what's happening with health, and we should, draw people in to engage them. I think that's a very good point, yeah.
We should, but on the other hand, we also should help people be suspicious of people that are that sure of themselves, because nothing in life is that sure, so they're lying.
But I get your point, though, Harriet. I get your point, though, about teaching people to see through bullshit. I think.
Yeah, exactly. That anybody who's so sure has God on their side. But wait a minute, how do you know? And one way is to trace the money. Who's making money off this? Who isn't? And that may be a guide.
Yeah, that's difficult as well, because we had, I don't know if you know Jack, what's her name, the first name? Bootstrap Cook. She's called Bootstrap Cook. She's a wonderful woman who was, homeless for ages, had a alcohol problem for years, was on the street with her kids, managed to pull herself up by her bootstraps, which is where her name comes from. And she came up with all this way of how to make money, how to make good food when you've not got a lot of money. And massive amount of difference she made to so many people. And she made a little bit of money, not even a lot at all, anywhere near a lot. And she, she posts and, anti-greed and, trying to, lift people out of poverty. And she gets hammered and attacked. And she said the police out, and she said, really, really attacked. And one of the biggest things they say is, well, you're making loads of money from it. And it's that thing where, well, if money is actually where the power is, then we kind of do need to make money to have a voice to try and. Mm-hmm. So it's very, I think I find it very difficult, if I'm honest.
Except how much money is she making versus the people propagating the idea of you not giving everyone protection?
She doesn't even own her own house. Mm. She's still renting. She's, it's not a lot at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, she is making money from selling her books to help people out of poverty, which people see as a contradiction.
Huh. But how can you be pure in a capitalist society? You have to exist.
Right, but most people don't quite understand that contradiction, and that comes back to why, like, if you are in the teaching, if you are in the care sector, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a nurse, social worker, right? The common refrain that, like, you should be doing it for the love and not the money.
Yeah, and you can't live on love.
Well, it's not only that you can't live on love, but that, it actively, one of the ways that I've always, kind of tried to, because, a lot of times people will say you can't, you can't live on love. And they're just like, well, that's why you need a good husband, right? No, I'm serious.
Right.
Or that you need a good. And the reality is that, a lot of people in this sector do tend to have high earning partners that allow them, nursing being an exception, but one of the major aspects of, like, you are doing important work, and important work should get paid, obviously, but also that, in order to do the job properly, you should be a less stressed individual.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's the issue that we have with our nurses just now. We have nurses that are coming into brutal conditions nobody's ever seen before. I mean, the closest I got to it is when I was working out in East Africa, and it was worse there, but it was this kind of field medicine feel to it, and it's stressful, and you're seeing people dying, and relatives are upset, and everyone's stressed, and everyone's arguing with each other, and it's a really stressful environment to come into. And then the nurse doesn't go home and escape into a nice, safe environment. She's going home and thinking, right now I've got, how do I get, meals for the kids, and we've got this bill to pay, and, the cost of it.
Right.
And you've got, then what I say to the government is, you have a choice. If you say to a nurse, I will relieve your home stress, they will all work more and they will all do overtime, and they'll, because you've relieved that burden.
Right. That financial stress.
Absolutely. There's only so much burden one person can take, emotional and, so a lot of nurses are now just going, you know what, I'm going to go and work in a supermarket and I'll do the extra hours, but at least I'm not stressed at all.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know a couple of people, not in the UK, but in the United States, that took an early retirement from the medical field for that reason. Very same reason. But, it's also one of those things where pay is separate from working conditions, because you could pay nurses loads of money, but if you don't have good working conditions, if you don't have good nurse to patient ratio, you still run into problems. So it's not just a matter of pay, but it's also a matter of proper staffing, especially in the care sector.
Well, in the big strikes in Kaiser Healthcare and in New York, across this country, there have been tens, if not hundreds of thousands of nurses on strike. There's two main demands. One of them is lower staff-patient ratios so that they can take care of people. And the second is salary. But even a big salary, if you can't take care of the people that you need to take care of, isn't something they've rejected.
Right. Well, one of this is much more specific to the United States. I'm hoping that the UK doesn't have this kind of issue, but one of the major issues that I know that a lot of nurses that I know have talked about is how much liability is shifting towards individual nurses rather than the administration. So like if a patient goes wrong, there have been a couple of court cases that have kind of set a precedence to shifting blame to individual nurses and nurses being individually responsible rather than within working, when it is a serious working condition issue.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we don't have faith that our organisations will step up and accept that some of the error that occurred was relating to the undue pressures. I mean, we had a very famous case here of a middle grade doctor, so that's someone that's nearly a consultant or attending, as you would call it in the States. And they were managing paediatric wards out of hours on the weekend. And they were doing so much, so much work, so many patients they were looking after. And there was one patient that was unwell that she mentioned to the consultant. The consultant said, give her a bit more fluid. And anyway, eventually that child died. And actually she got prosecuted for manslaughter. And it got struck off. Prosecution was held up. She got convicted of manslaughter, and there was this massive uproar about it. That it was the level of conditions, and the consultant who was the one advising her, who knew about the case, he disappeared. Didn't hear anything about him. He went away. Yeah, he didn't come up to court and say, "Well, actually, yes, I remember." Nothing like that, and the organisation didn't step up, and I think everybody is feared of that moment when you get a mistake under these pressures, and your license is gone, and then your way of earning a living is gone. I think that's a huge driver for people leaving at the moment.
Well, I mean, you get into medicine is ultimately, especially in terms of emergency medicine, it's one of the highest stake professions in many ways, right? You are responsible for people's lives.
And people love it, though. People do love that. I mean, most of my colleagues usually love it. Yeah,
some people really like that, high adrenaline, high stakes environment. But it does require proper staffing to function. And one of the issues with the United States is also the issues with traveling nurses. You make a lot more money being a traveling nurse. And so a lot of people go into traveling, to do traveling nursing, but the only thing is because of the liability issues that, nurses face, they'll often travel to a hospital and be contracted to work the hospital, but then they won't sign in because it's unsafe conditions and they are now liable if they sign in. The minute you sign in, you are liable, right? So there have been a lot
of conditions.
Right. So there have been a lot of issues that I've seen like on Twitter, like nurses freaking out because they're like, oh, like, we're supposed to get like 5 traveling nurses today that's supposed to help us out. They're not clocking in. And also it ends up being like a lot of resentment between the nurses on staff and the traveling nurses because the traveling nurses are often getting paid a lot more.
They're also often used as strike breakers, which causes some resentment.
Yeah. So
we
multiple.
Call them bank nurses here and locum doctors. And there's definitely an exodus towards that way of working. And they do get paid more. I'd say they get paid the right amount that all the staff should be getting paid.
Right.
But we've actually missed the window where if they had increased the staffing numbers, the staff to patient ratios would have been good enough that nurses would have stayed a lot longer and not been so upset about how badly they're paid for what the conditions are. So I think what you're saying, if they put the staff in earlier, like, a couple of years ago, I think they could have got away with paying the nurses, the low income for a lot longer. But now we're at this point where there's no one that will do the job unless the money is significantly better than what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, just as a side, maybe I'll cut this out, but, the last 10 years or so, whatever, blah, 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 I watch these politicians do their performances and say their speeches, and they often talk about with the NHS, it will always be free at the point of use. And maybe I don't understand the lingo, but it always sounds like the little asterisk terms and conditions that it insinuates that at a certain point it's going to get really expensive, right? You might be free when you walk in the door, but then, is it sinister or am I just sort of misunderstanding terminology?
Yeah, I've never really understood that term either. I mean, it's not free. We pay our taxes for it. It's universal access would be, you will always have universal access. I mean, and those are the key determinants for a successful health service is anyone can access it at any time in their life. You get the same treatment if you're the richest guy or you're the poorest guy. That is the fundamental part of healthcare, which the vast majority of systems around the world do. They do have top-up private health systems, but you don't get better treatment. You don't get, a new treatment that no one else gets. You just get, you probably get a bit quicker access. You get, more access to the consultant. You get better meals when you go in hospital. You get those little perks, but the fundamental thing is universal access to healthcare. And that is what we're fighting for in the NHS just now and will continue to fight for. I don't fully trust a politician that says we will keep it free at the point of care and who doesn't also say in that sentence somewhere there will be universal access to healthcare.
That's right.
And I think that's the bar to watch. As soon as it's not universal, as soon as some treatments become only on insurance, then you're
dead.
In the US system then.
It must be very difficult, actually. American listeners, when they hear this, they're just like, fuck you.
Yeah, totally. You don't know how good you've got it.
I feel terrible that you're going towards our terrible and deadly example.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrifying, if I'm honest. It's absolutely terrifying. And from how high we've come, we've been doing so well. The most cost-effective health service in the world for what we get out of it, and we're just trying to now. The government are trying to force this the least efficient, most expensive. And to be frank, your outcomes in the States are not good.
No, we have the most dead in the world of COVID.
there's a prime example of it. Very, very interesting that a lot of the countries that did really badly were those who had the extreme kind of, I didn't even want to call them capitalists. It's even worse than that. But they had those in charge, You got Johnson, Trump, and Bolsonaro, and they all did very, very badly.
Well, Biden isn't doing any better, but
he might have done better if he had it at the start. He might have done better, maybe. I think.
Yeah, and he won't go to jail. That's a little better.
Yeah, it's a pretty low bar, I guess. But yeah, I think personally, I think there's something I need to do to help. I don't feel sort of helpless. And I just sort of wonder as well, I don't know if it's just me or if it's like a British thing, but there's definitely this thing about, I think with that Jack Monroe thing, it's like, it's not about economics, it's about morality. It's like if you say that you are this thing or you present yourself as this thing, it's much easier to tear you down than if you just say, I enjoy stealing public money. It's like, well, surprise, surprise, politician. It's water off a duck's back. They're sort of almost allowed to do it because the expectation's so low. So I feel like, whether it's just a sort of individual thing where I'm just sort of defeated by the blatant corruption, or whether that's just felt everywhere. And, Britain definitely does have a weird thing where if someone's wearing a suit, people sort of bow to them, and it's kind of gross. It is. Maybe the Scottish and Welsh a bit less, the English.
Scotland definitely less. I mean, you will not get extra. I mean, I have to say, patients are great here. They, mainly, particularly in the rural areas, they're very, when I say respectful, I think they just appreciate, getting the care. But Scots folk don't bow down to your stature ever.
Well, I mean, that's
good. It's a national pride thing. You'd probably take a beating if you did that up here. But I tell you something that's not clear yet, and I think maybe a cause for hope for me, is this surge in extreme, I guess, for want of a better word, right-wing capitalism and this surge in disinformation and greed and misogyny, etc. Is this the last flung efforts of a dwindling, Neanderthal type, part of society that's kind of railing against the majority progressive, baseline population? And will this fling be very uncomfortable and very bad for, a time, but actually we'll just see them die out as we face climate change and everything together? Or is this a genuine attempt to kind of shift the world order back to that kind of old way of doing things? I don't know.
I don't know. I do think, though, in the United States, the empire is falling, and it's a way of denying that. And it also, people have given up on being actually represented by our government, but they want emotional release. That's what they want from the government. Extremes, rage, contests.
Yeah.
To get out their frustration.
I definitely get that, yeah. They want emotional connection. They want a reason why they feel this way. Just give them any reason and they'll hold on to it. But that stage, Harriet,
program doesn't work. The government doesn't represent their needs anymore, but at least they get an emotional release through it, I think.
I genuinely believe that the right wing in this country will fail. And I think they will fail, and they only ever get these little periods in power because they ultimately always fail, because it's always about them and not about the people. So I definitely still have hope. Just that kind of sense of dread of how much fixing we'll need to do when they're gone.
Yeah, equally. I don't know. Just to wrap it all up, it looked like you wanted to say something in regards to hope. Maybe you want to crush all our spirits, but I'm there for it.
No. I don't. it's not necessarily about hope, but ultimately people develop a lot of right-wing sentiments, often out of, justifiable experiences in their life.
Mm.
And I think rather than to discard people, it's really, often these are things, especially in the United States, people hate the social services because the social services are extremely punitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You'll get billed for we, overpaid you for these months and now you owe us $5,000 and we're going to garnish your bank account, kind of thing. That happens routinely with people that,
I have to say that the States, I was actually born in the States. My uncles still live there and my cousins are all there. And my uncle's actually a private, well, they're all private, but obstetrician there. And I don't know, I find that it's so commercial, everything. And everything's always about money. Have you been to Germany? It's really interesting places. Like they don't advertise to you. There's no adverts. There's no, very rarely these special discounts and offers. And do you want to go supersize and all that? It's very much like, I just feel like the public would just really not like a place that was forcing them to have something they didn't need. It's a strange. It's
better. Maybe they learned something from their defeat in World War II.
I guess we just have to end it there. There's no squeaky clean hopium at the end. It's just a real mess, and we'll have to somehow figure out how to what direction to go. Yeah,
we will win. We will win.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you so much for giving me the time to talk. And I think I got a wee bit of counselling along the way, did I? I felt that way.
Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons: Rebecca Johns, Bruce Rogers Vaughan, Alexander Lashley, Sheena Belmas, Seamus O'Connell, Alex Placito, and Wig Shaker.
If you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.